Last night I witnessed a horrible first date. I'm sure my story can be topped. I was at a fairly empty cafe one evening. Couple came in and sat so close that I had to move my chair to let them pass. WTF. He looked a bit Adam Levine-ish except with a mad stare in his eyes. She was a very petite woman who turned out to be from Spain. He then spent ages lamenting how awful British women are and how exotic she looked, alternating between how his ex-GFS had treated him badly and dumped him and gushing about how feminine and perfect she was. He didn't seem to notice how quiet she was getting. He then said, "God, I absolutely hated it when my ex used the wrong chopping board for fruit again, WTF." And she replied in a heavy accent, "I do not like you," and walked off. He sat there for a bit and then eventually left too. No doubt to carry on his quest to find someone to put up with his appalling personality. She's my new hero. I had a very awkward date a few years back. I ran into an old high school friend I hadn't seen in years. We sit down and chit chat a bit and he asks me out. He seems like a very cool guy and I said sure. He takes me out to the Sonic drive-thru. No big deal. I like their shakes and burgers. He asks me what I want and orders nothing but what I asked for, which struck me odd. I thought we would stay parked but we ended up eating as he drove us around, which was awkward. I offered some of my burger to him and he finished it off for me. I felt a little bad, guess he didn't have much money. I would have gladly paid for my own way. Then the conversation turned to fricking. Out of the blue he asks me, "So when do you think it's appropriate for someone to start fricking after dating?" I said, "Well, I'm an absolute prude." I thought he was just messing around but he was actually quite serious. He kept pushing it. Then all of a sudden at a red light he leans in, grabs the back of my head, and kisses me. He slammed his slobbering tongue in my mouth and starts swirling it around. His hot breath smelled of burgers. I pulled away and asked to be taken home. He takes me home, chit-chatting like nothing happened and still about fricking and other inappropriate topics. When we got home he asked me to call him later and I didn't. I went on a date with a phone sex operator. Yes, you heard me right. It was senior year of high school and one of my friends at the time was starting to get into online dating. Naturally, as a teenager I was intrigued by the idea of meeting a woman online and possibly having physical relations with her. My friend had met this girl who was pretty cute and told me she had a friend who was also looking. Jackpot. I asked him to hook me up and the girl instantly agreed. We had a group date for the end of the week. But as the days went on I realized I had no idea who this girl was or what she looked like. My friend told me she had a steamy voice and was a phone sex operator, but I didn't even know how old she was or anything. So I asked my friend a couple questions. "How old is she?" 24. He says, That's a little old. I was only 17 at the time. "What does she look like?" "She's a little chubby but she's not too bad. You want to talk to her?" "Well, yeah, that'd be good." Calls her up and I talk to her. Hottest voice ever. Everything seems cool and I wait until Saturday. Saturday comes and my friend comes with me and gets me to go pick up the girls. First his girlfriend, who is, like I said, pretty good looking. A little chubby but cute in the face and her figure is well proportioned. Then we go pick up my date. Holy Jabba the Hutt. This girl was large, definitely over 400 pounds. My friend said she was light enough to sit in my lap. I see now he meant that figuratively. She was very unattractive, which sounds mean to say but she was. Her hair was very frizzy and unmanaged. Her clothes were very tight fitting and too revealing and she smelled terrible. Not BO, but just way too much perfume. It choked you as she approached. Well, she gets in the car and we head off. Now, where do you think we're going? To see a movie? Go to lunch? Walk on the beach? Perhaps? We go to Walmart. This is my date's idea of a good time, I guess. Well, that's kind of lame but I say nothing. I hope this might be interesting. Well, it was, but not in the way I'd been hoping. Turns out we were going to Walmart because she needed to get some things. Jewelry, feminine hygiene products, a couple DVDs, that sort of thing. Oh, and we weren't paying for this stuff, I guess. Yes, that's right. My date brought us to Walmart to fricking shoplift, and they were all three of them doing this. By this point I am completely checked out. We go back to the car and start heading back. She says now she needs to go to Target and then they can head back to her place for some fun. Nope, I'm out. I tell her I need to get home to help make dinner. She says they can all come drop me off at my house. I say the park is fine. So they take me to the park and drop me off and I freaking run home. I never spoke to that friend again. TLDR. Went shoplifting for a first date with fat phone SX operator. Whoa. Talk about how Jabba started his criminal empire, one Walmart at a time. So I went on a date with this guy. He was 45 minutes late. I should have known right then to head home, but I looked cute and I was already downtown. He finally shows up. We head to a pub and he is feeding me beers. Like, I haven't had 2 sips of this beer yet. So after about 3 beers he asks me what I'm doing after this and I tell him I'm heading home. He kept asking me to come over. I continuously said no. Then, he says he is heading out for a smoke. Never comes back. I kept waiting for the camera crews to jump out. They didn't. Worst date of my life. Wow, frick that guy. I got one. Met a girl in one of my classes and we hit it off pretty quickly. Same major, from the same area, same interests and so on. She was a few years older but I figured what the heck. She's cute and we get along, so I asked her out. That Friday she meets me at my local hangout and we have a great time. So great that after a couple of beers we decide to roll to my place. We leave her car there and head out. At my place things start off great. We are in bed doing our thing and just before I take the panties off she tells me, by the way, I have herpes. Now I give her props for telling me she didn't have to and she wasn't having an outbreak, so I wouldn't have noticed, but I wish she told me earlier. But that's cool, we can just chill. Till her phone rings, which we ignore. And then it rings again and again and again. Finally she listens to her voicemail and things get even more interesting. Her boyfriend of 10 years, who was watching her kid that I was unaware of, has tracked her phone's GPS and is trolling my block with a loaded .45 looking for us. Fortunately I parked in the garage and her car was at the bar, so he never found out which house I was in and gave up. So now it's time for some answers. She tells me she really likes me and wants to leave her boyfriend for me. She also tells me he owns the house, so her and her daughter are going to need a place to stay. And she doesn't work. I explain to her that this is not what I'm looking for and after a bit she seems to accept it. I take her to her car and drop her off. Crisis averted, right? Number. For the next 3 days I receive walls of texts about how perfect we are for each other and how great things would be if I allow it. How good of a role model I could be to her kid. After 3 days it devolves into begging and then into messages about how it can just be about fricking with no emotional ties. And on and on and on. Skip to the morning of our next class together. There is no way in heck I'm going. 5 minutes into the class and my phone starts blowing up. Constantly. Eventually I send her a text and tell her I am sick and would like to get some rest. Could she please stop calling texting? Within 20 minutes my doorbell rings and I have absolutely no intention of answering it. After a few rings there is tapping on my window. Frick all that noise. Eventually she leaves and sends me a text letting me know there is chicken soup from Fresh and Easy on my doorstep along with some cold medicine. Holy frick. That means she left class and after everything thinking that all was great and I was going to let her in. It was weeks before the text stopped and I only went back to that class for the final. It was quite the first date. TLDR. First date almost results in herpes and a gunshot wound but ends instead with some delicious chicken soup. I would not have eaten the soup. I visited LA by myself and witnessed a pretty stereotypically bad LA date. I went to this pretty expensive restaurant on a lark. Later learned it apparently has a bit of a reputation for bringing in people who are big shots and stars. If that paints a good picture. The table beside mine is a 45-year-old man and a young early 20s woman. I'm reading my book, chilling out waiting for my entree to come, just eavesdropping shamelessly. He apparently picked her up in a coffee shop where she's a barista. He dates too much, and unsuccessfully. All she talks about is this friggin' coffee shop, and boring minutia, and he's just looking at her being quietly bored to tears. She's also ordered arguably one of the most expensive things on the menu, and is just picking at it. Finally though, she finishes, and a waiter comes over asking if they'd like the bill. He lights up, and just as he's saying yes, she cuts him off and asks for the dessert menu on what is already probably a $250 plus bill. He looked like someone crap on his birthday cake. Long story short, I really enjoyed my meal there. That just made me feel so sad. That poor man. I once sat next to a couple on a date at a teppanyaki show dinner. They had barely said a word to each other when I hear the guy ask her, "So, have you seen the movie Phone Booth?" She replied no. They sat there in silence dodging flying egg for the rest of the show. A friend of mine kept insisting that I meet a friend of hers for a date because she thinks we would go well together. Perfect for me, she says. So I'll let myself get talked into meeting him at my favorite bar in town. I show up and within 5 minutes I know that he is not interested in women. To top it off, she ended up inviting herself and sat between us. I ended up being the third wheel on my own date with a gay man. He came out of the closet a few months later, which was fine with me. It only sucks that I have such a track record of dating men that later come out of the closet that my family now says, "Oh, she likes him. He must be gay." Went on a blind date with a girl from Facebook. Super safe, I know. Well, when we show up, my cousin appears out of nowhere, saying he was going to be my wingman. I told him to frick off, but he didn't listen and just followed us around all night. We were sitting in the theater, and he wouldn't stop whispering for us to make out. I turned to her to say I was sorry, and she stuck her tongue down my throat. I wasn't planning on kissing her, and since I was still kind of new at it, got really confused. I tried to put my arm around her during, and ended up hitting her in the face. She pulled away, screamed, and the entire theater turned and got quiet. My cousin just whispered, "Okay, now grab her boob." Sorry for the cliffhanger ending, but after everyone had turned back around, she got up and went to the bathroom for the whole movie, so no boob grabbing happened. But do not fear, editors, my day did come. 3 years later I finally got that boob grab, and I have to say that victory was oh so sweet. I used to work in a local bar down the road. My friend was going on his first date with a girl and he took her to the bar I worked. My friend is also notorious for his alcohol consumption. He and his date sat at the bar and at first sight, it looked like the date was going rather well. About 2 hours later I look over at my mate, sitting on a bar stool with both feet propped on the bar, absolutely wasted, and lets out a huge fart and he wafts it in the direction of his date's face saying, "Smell that." The girl's mortified. I nearly wet myself from laughing and thought there's not a chance in heck he's going to get laid now. I was wrong, he brought her home that night. Standards. Some people's go pretty low. Who the frick brings a laptop on a date? My reaction was more along the lines of, who the frick brings a lap? Oh, she plays WoW. Well, alright. Wasn't a first date, but a few weeks ago I was in Buffalo Wild Wings, frick yes, mango habanero, and some guy renewed his vows with his wife of 7 years. He got on the loudspeaker and everything. She wasn't exactly thrilled. Whenever I see crap like that I always think it's all for the guy's ego and not the girl's pleasure. Met a girl online. She lives one town over. She was looking mainly for a frick buddy, and at the time, that's exactly what I wanted. The first red flag was that she had only 2 profile pics and they were both black and white of the same angle. I agree to meet her as she's coming to my town that weekend. I meet her and her weird looking friend in a car out in front of this house. Her weird friend immediately tries to hit me up for gas money. I refuse and they say that's okay, but they want to hit up a store for some reason. As this initial conversation is taking place, I get a quick look at the girl I'm supposed to be seeing. She's a bit thicker than her profile pics would make it seem, but really not too bad. She was smoking when I walked up to the car, and as soon as the first cig was dead, she lit up another one. So she was obviously a chain smoker. Add another demerit. We get to this grocery store and now the girl gets out of the car to where I can see her more fully. It's then that I really notice her outfit. She's wearing a 2 sizes too small Mighty Morphin Power Rangers jacket, brown slacks that my grandpa would have worn in the 80s, and these funky shoes. Okay, now I realize she has no idea how to dress or present herself. She walks with me through the parking lot, and as she gets closer, I start to detect a whiff of some kind of funk. Then it hits me, she has BO, and keep in mind that we're outside, and the wind is blowing, yet I can still smell her funk. It's at this point that I decide I need to abandon ship. As I'm thinking this, she turns directly towards me and it's then that I realize the icing on the cake. She has a lazy eye. I've posted this before, and people with a lazy eye get really pee. Keep in mind the context that this girl's qualities were just going downhill at light speed and the eye was just kinda straw on an already broken camel's back. I ended up calling my friend in the bathroom of the grocery store and telling him to call me, informing me that I was late for a made-up obligation that I had forgotten about. Weird friend had to leave suddenly, so I drove back smelly girl. On the drive to where she was staying, she told me a story about stabbing another girl in high school. Needless to say, I ran a couple of stop signs on the way to her place. Finally, a story about me. I witnessed a really good one while bartending a few years ago. A guy came in expecting it to be a first date from an online site. It was actually his very pregnant wife, girlfriend, who was sitting at the table. Her friend was sitting at the bar filling me in. I guess the friend came to give her pregnant and newly single friend a ride home after she broke up with the douche. It was beautifully awkward. This is why I want to be a bartender. I'm a shameless gossip. Invited me at her hotel for a sleepover after a really expensive dinner. Boyfriend decided to surprise her at 8 o'clock in the morning. I was sitting at a hotel bar having a few drinks before heading up to my room. It was pretty empty. There was a sailor to my left, who I ended up drinking with after the events below, and a couple halfway down the bar to the right. A very beautiful, haughty looking girl, and a reasonably good looking, well-dressed fellow, both probably late 20s, early 30s. At first I thought they were on a terrible first date, but it soon became clear that they were in the tail end of a failed relationship. This was not the stage where things are slowly degrading toward an inevitable breakup. I mean, they should have been broken up last month, but there they were, having a drink together in the smoking wreckage of their relationship. The girl didn't say anything the entire hour or so that I watched them with cringing fascination. Every time the guy spoke, she made a little snort of disgusted annoyance and stared pointedly away from him. I was both disappointed and incredibly relieved when they finally left, and I promised myself that I would never stay with a girl past the point when we were no longer on speaking terms. Sounds like married couple post-argument. Been there. Went to a movie with a girl in high school. Her older sister shows up before the movie even starts and apparently that means I can't sit next to the girl. I left. This is the case of her not being allowed to date. The older sister was sent to make sure she was not on a date. I took a girl back to her place once after a first date. It turns out she was a hoarder. I use the bathroom, and kitty litter is everywhere. Piles are in the corner. I come out. She's naked on the bed. Being a guy, I say what the heck. It's not until I'm naked when I realize there's kitty litter on the bed. We start going at it. I look down, and there's tampon strings hanging out. She's on her period. I realize just how unsanitary and fricked up this whole thing is and I start to back away. She starts biting me on the collarbone. I get her to back off. She rolls over and turns off the lights and passes out drunk. For 6 hours, I'm awake on this bed with the smell of kitty litter all over the entire apartment. I can't grab my clothes because they're mixed in with the crap all over the floor. As soon as sunlight hits, I start to grab my clothes and dress and get the heck out of there. I had to shower for about 45 minutes to get the smell of kitty off of me once I got home. When I was 16 I went on a blind date with this guy 2 hours away from my hometown. I got there by train and had always the option to meet and call a friend who lived nearby this town. So I was there a bit too early and started walking around a bit. Finally it was 4 PM and we met. He was 23 at that time, student and working. Unfortunately he was just as tall as me and extremely skinny, so not really my type of guy at that time. But nevertheless we went to grab some food and had a good time. At around 7 PM he wanted to head home and asked me if I wanted to get home with him. I wasn't sure, but on the other hand I also didn't want to stay with my friend. And I think I was still in my I am so cool phase, combined with teenage insecurity and a desperate wish to have someone. So I told him I will come with him. I knew that he still lived with his parents, but he told me that they won't be around. When we arrived at his place, his parents were home and I was greeted by a happy mom, who referred happily to me as my son's first girlfriend. I was shocked, but I also couldn't leave, since the next train station was miles away and at that time no more trains would have gone back to my hometown. So I stayed. 30 minutes later we had dinner with the whole family, mother, father and sister, and everyone asked me so many questions. Afterwards we all sat down to play card games and my date didn't seem to realize that I felt completely uncomfortable. 3 hours later we were finally alone in his room and he just jumped in his pajamas, made me a bed on a single mattress and proceeded to sleep in his bed. I tried to kiss him or just hold his hand, but he did not respond to anything. So I also went to sleep and in the next morning we had breakfast with his parents and sister again. His parents had this expecting look on their face and his dad even started to make obscene jokes. Luckily my date had to work that day and dropped me off at the train station before. There he finally kissed me and whispered "I love you" into my ear and that he is happy that I get along so well with his family. I just ran for my train. I felt physically awkward just reading that, yikes. I once took a girl to a bar Christmas party for a first date, open bar, free food, etc. Knowing that I was only 18 at the time and rarely drank, the employees proceeded to get me crap-faced drunk in front of my new lady friend. I then promptly passed out in a pile of cooking grease and had to get carried to my car, driven home, carried to my bed by my sister's boyfriend. During this entire scene I apparently kept telling everyone that I was going to get laid that night. It made a complete butt of myself. I married her 4 years later and she's still freaking awesome. First date with the current girlfriend. She goes to the bathroom and this guy leans in through the door, which we were seated next to, and asks something weird like, "Do you know if that place over the road is open?" I turn around and look where he pointed. Turn back and say, "How the frick would I know, mate?" He mumbles something and walks away. I then get a sinking feeling. He's stolen something. I run outside and can't see where he went. Turns out he stole her brand new iPhone off the table where she just loves keeping it when dining. Luckily she has insurance and is dang cool cause she didn't mind too much. Great start. Huh. This is why you always take your electronics with you to the toilets. Well, that and read it. Set up on a date by my best friend's girl with a friend of hers I knew only casually. Had hung out as part of a group of friends several times. We meet for dinner at a decent Italian place. Halfway through dinner, after the typical get to know you chit chat, her, "So what will our kids look like?" Me, "They won't." I noped the heck out of there right quick. Paid the bill and left. Crazy didn't get the hint. Called me repeatedly. I made it very clear I wasn't interested and certainly not going to be her baby daddy. Later, I find she had a scrapbook with photoshopped pictures of me. Think face swap. And was telling people we were involved, etc. Eventually, this escalated to driving by my house, stalking my job, ring and run pranks on my doorbell, weird, disjointed letters left in my mailbox. Finally had to get police involved, restraining order, order of protection, etc. TL, DR. Sometimes, you don't have to stick your dong in it to get crazy. Driving home one evening I stopped to help a motorist who had lost a tire off his vehicle. It turns out he was on his way to a first date, blind nonetheless. I ask if he needs a ride somewhere and he says, "Well, if you wouldn't mind taking me to pick her up and dropping us off at my house." Now this is a bit weird but I guess I don't mind. He directs me to her house. Turns out she is in the US as part of a study abroad program. She is originally from Brazil. Now I know being picked up by your date and a complete stranger could be awkward, but this guy smoothed it right over by using this opening gem. "Say you're from Brazil, huh? What was it like growing up without electricity?" 5 minutes of this line of questioning I decided to jump in and try to save the poor kid by asking questions about Brazil's perception of the US versus her experiences here. Conversation begins to flow. He's feeling a bit more comfortable, ready to jump back in. He asks, "I bet you were excited to try McDonald's, huh?" Clearly someone was getting lucky tonight. This is about the time I arrived at his trailer to drop them off. Poor girl. The first date I ever went on was when I was around 12 or 13, early in my dating career, and I didn't understand a lot of the essential rules, like rule number 1, when going on a date, never let her bring her entourage of friends. That was mistake 1. I was a kid with a rather messy face, and no love for those spinny carnival rides. But I was also a kid with a deep need to get his date on, as it were. Hormones won out on this one, much to my eventual demise. My facial inconsistencies, weed, cold sores, came in when one of her friends asked me what was on the corner of my mouth. I said I stabbed myself while eating, and managed to pass that one off pretty well. But the seeds of caution were planted. My date wanted to go on some of the more gastrointestinally disastrous Carnival rides, and though logic was virtually throttling my testicles, the Tiny Tim twins won out, and I ended up getting on a ride. Fast forward to getting off the ride when it was over, my hand covered in vomit, and a good deal of her covered in it as well. As we ran off to clean up my stomach's cocktail of hot dogs and funnel cake, my first words to her were, "I guess we aren't going to kiss now." One time I went on a date with a dude I had been into for about a year. We had classes together. He finally agrees. We go to a bar. I proceed to get hammered. Really, embarrassingly so. I essentially poured myself into his car when we wrapped up at the bar. The last thing I said to him as I got out of the car at my place, "Look, I know I'm hammered, but I've been wanting to rest a drink on that end table but for 7 months. Is this happening?" Needless to say, it didn't. You at least had good taste in the dude. He didn't take advantage of an inebriated girl. I met a guy at a bar. He was with a group of people and they all invited me to hang with them. We went back to his apartment and hung out for a few hours. That visit, the place was a little messy, but not too bad. At the end of the evening, he asked me out on a proper date, and I accepted. Date night rolled around and I met him at his place, as agreed. When I walked in, he immediately pointed out that he had cleaned up for me. I oohed and ahed appropriately, then indicated I was ready to go. Halfway out the door, he asked me if I had ever seen the movie 40-Year-Old Virgin. I said I had and he replied, "You know that part where she asks him to blow in the tube to start the car? Yeah, so, can you drive?" Okay, fair enough. We all make mistakes. I drove. We had some wings and beer and then went out to the patio to smoke. He was screwing with his phone throughout dinner, but whatever, who doesn't? A few minutes after sitting down on the patio though, an older black man approached our table and sat down. My date introduced the man as his ex-girlfriend's father and his drug dealer. He proceeded to conduct a deal right there in front of God and everyone. Okay, fine. So I know this is going nowhere, but I am painfully nice, so I agreed to return to his place to watch a movie before heading home. I was having a hard time getting comfortable on the sofa, so I lifted the throw pillow to fluff it, rearrange it. Beneath the pillow I discovered a huge, purple celeb. Now, at this point, there were a number of things he could have said that may, or may not, have been cute, funny or even a little classy. His choice? I like the way it feels on my balls when I jerk off. You probably want to leave now. Huh. Any one of these things wouldn't kill a date for me, but all combined on a first date, it was a little much. Forgot to TLDR. First date had a sobriety check on his car, conducted a drug deal with his ex-girlfriend's father, and forgot to put away his big, purple celeb he used to massage his balls while masturbating. By massage his balls, he really meant shove up my poop chute. If you are new to the channel, you can subscribe. I publish new videos every day. Until then, check another video. Bye for now.